Victor stood stunned, unable to accept what he had just heard. Long known by whispers as the Northern Scoundrel, Ghislain now stood before him, exuding the might of a high-level knight. If not for the presence of that master, the true Northern finest sword, Victor himself would have claimed the title, though in his mind he already had. His gaze fell as a hollow laugh escaped him, reacting to the unexpected admission. He assumed Ghislain's identity was hidden, just as his own had been. The laugh grew louder, breath becoming rapid, pushed by disbelief. Ghislain had never once crossed Victor's mind. His name had never surfaced on any threat reports. To have fallen at the hands of someone so unrecognized, so dismissed, it wrapped him in a suffocating wave of humiliation. Heat surged through his head, his vision tilting with dizziness. He staggered, then regained his footing and stance. He murmured to himself, bitterly acknowledging that the greatest knight in the North had been struck down by none other than the Northern Scoundrel. With eyes gleaming with lethal promise, Ghislain affirmed the notion without words. This place, this moment, here Ghislain would see it end. He intended not only to end Victor, but to claim the title of the North's true greatest for himself. He also made clear that he knew Victor's name. A dry chuckle slipped from Victor's lips as he reflected on Ghislain's arrogance. Yet something about hearing his name spoken aloud forced his focus to snap back into place, as though doused in frigid water. He admitted to himself that he had no understanding of how Ghislain had planned such a trap. Still, in war, the fundamental rule remained unchanged. Use whatever means necessary to achieve victory. He lifted his sword and reminded himself of a soldier's truth. In the end, the one left standing claims the triumph, no matter how the path unfolds. Mana exploded from within him as he assumed his stance. Pain etched itself across his face, his limbs, his chest. His armor radiated blistering heat, more curse than shield, and his sword seemed ready to buckle under the next strain. His eyes now shone with a sharp, deadly clarity. Though he suppressed the heat with the remnants of his mana, he recognized the truth. There was little strength left. After defeating both the Mad Dog and the White Lion, there was no more room for delay. This fight needed to end, and fast. Across from him, Ghislain appeared to agree. He moved with calm grace, his hands bringing his sword into position. His third mana core surged fully open, an unchecked power coursed through every fiber of his body. It was a presence as dominating as Victor's. Yet unlike the cool hue of Victor's mana, Ghislain's pulsed with a purplish-crimson gleam, mirrored by the glow of his blade. Ghislain's piercing gaze locked on his opponent. Though he carried the fury of a lifetime, his demeanor remained composed, almost detached. With practiced restraint, he issued a silent invitation to battle. Elsewhere, atop the castle's chaotic walls, Zwalter's voice rang with unwavering command. Randolph and Scovin flanked him, driving their blades into enemy lines with grim purpose. Belinda and Kaer cut paths through the battlefield, dismantling what remained. The Dygald forces, already in disarray, fell before them like discarded remnants. Blood-streaked and faltering, Gillian managed to mount a horse, withdrawing in retreat. Inside the gate, Vanessa had succumbed to unconsciousness after casting a spell that no Fifth Circle mage should have endured. The sheer mental strain had overwhelmed her completely. Now, only Victor remained, a final wall of resistance in this war. After decimating the battlefield and scattering Dygald's ranks, Ghislain had chosen to confront this last stronghold personally. Without warning, both figures blurred into motion, the distance between them vanishing in an instant as the final clash began. Their swords met with a force that sent waves of distortion rippling through the surrounding flames. Against all odds, Victor withstood the torrent of Ghislain's mana, unleashed in full through all three cores. Though scorched and battered by the inferno, his mana reserves remained deep and formidable. Following the initial clash, both warriors moved in seamless arcs, blades sweeping through the air before meeting again in a balanced collision. Ghislain suffered from a disadvantage. His mana reserve was inferior. However, clothed in linen crafted from the dire ascent, he had no need to defend against the surrounding fire. Their exchange showed no signs of stopping. Ghislain began to consider that Victor might indeed deserve his title as the North's greatest knight. While Ghislain acknowledged the man's strength, Victor remained perplexed. The emergence of such a powerful figure from a secluded land like Perdium defied all expectations. It seemed an impossibility to cultivate such a warrior in secrecy. Another clash sent Ghislain off the ground, the force sliding him backward. A sharp tingle coursed through his arm, the recoil rattling his hand from the impact. Victor's attacks then grew faster, sharper. His sword moved with precise grace, each cut a testament to noble training. Yet despite the gulf in mana, Ghislain's raw power continued to withstand the onslaught. With poise regained, Ghislain brought his sword behind him and subtly shifted his stance. The slight turn deflected Victor's advancing blade. Redirecting his strength, Ghislain twisted and brought his sword down in a sweeping arc aimed at Victor's head. Victor met the strike with defiant resistance, showcasing that his defense was no less powerful than his offense. This time, the lower block was his to make. In a counter, Victor funneled more mana into his blade, pressing back against Ghislain's weapon. Though the strength behind the blows was overwhelming, Victor was Harold's trusted protege. His foundation remained unshaken. Spotting a chance, Victor stepped forward into Ghislain's zone, angling for a horizontal slash. With Ghislain's blade momentarily raised, an opening revealed itself. Yet, Ghislain reacted with calculated efficiency. He lifted a leg and halted Victor's hands. Years of combat experience had sculpted him into a fighter of exceptional pedigree, one who operated at the peak of human potential. Using Victor's hands as leverage, Ghislain stepped upward. The tide shifted. Victor now stood exposed, his blade suspended and vulnerable. With a fluid motion, Ghislain spun, his other leg sweeping wide. The momentum carried into Victor's face, and blood sprayed from his nose upon contact. Even so, Victor endured. Though unable to land a decisive strike, he pressed his senses to their limits, tracking every nuance of Ghislain's movement. Seizing momentum, Ghislain spun back and drove his sword upward with powerful grace. Victor barely had time to react, raising his sword in desperation to intercept. This time, it was Ghislain who pressed forward, unleashing a merciless flurry. Each collision threw them apart. The force behind each blow defied containment. Between exchanges, Victor growled out curses at his foe, his voice sharpened by frustration and fatigue. Then, as if in a final bid, Victor summoned the last of his strength. He channeled every remaining drop of mana into his sword, abandoning any thought of conservation. A feral scream accompanied his next surge. Power burst from him as he deflected Ghislain's sword, the force sending the other warrior flying. Ghislain landed several paces away, boots screeching against the ground as he steadied his stance. The wound on his arm pulsed with pain, a reminder that the duel was far from over. He understood the urgency. This had to end soon, but clarity and calm would remain his weapon. Though the injury was no more than a superficial cut, Victor felt a rush of exhilaration from having landed a blow. The reality of how Ghislain fought at such a formidable level still eluded him. But there was no denying the man's worth as a formidable rival. For a brief moment, both combatants paused, drawing breath while their eyes locked amidst the oppressive heat and towering flames. In silence, they acknowledged the unspoken truth: this battle demanded their all. Despite their urgency, it was Victor who moved first. In a blink, he closed the distance, form blurring as his sword lifted in preparation for a decisive strike. His mana flared, deepening in hue to a saturated blue. He brought his sword in an upward spin from behind, meeting the incoming force head-on. Ghislain matched his ferocity, bringing his own weapon down in tandem. Yet Ghislain's motion did not cease. He rotated his sword once more and brought it down again, compelling Victor to lift his blade to defend the second blow. In the narrow window that followed, Victor spun outward, drawing his cape across to obscure the motion of his sword, forcing Ghislain's focus entirely upon him. The deception might have worked had Ghislain not responded in time. Launching himself upward, he narrowly evaded Victor's sweeping horizontal strike, the blade slicing through empty space. From above, Ghislain channeled mana into his weapon, tinting it with a deeper, bloodier glow. He spun midair and delivered a forceful strike downward. Using the rising momentum from his previous motion, Victor brought his sword up in response. Their blades collided once again with equal intensity. Ghislain landed several paces away, but paused only to raise his sword once more and launch another heavy downward slash. Victor lifted his weapon to intercept it, their energies clashing again in a chorus of force. They both knew this could not continue for long. Each strike no longer echoed with the sound of metal, but with the raw pulse of mana colliding. Victor's refined knightly technique stood against Ghislain's erratic, brutal style forged in unrelenting survival. Victor then aimed a thrust at Ghislain's head, but the move was intercepted by a counterswing that diverted its path. For a heartbeat, their swords locked. Each man strained to overpower the other with pure strength, unmoved by pain or fear. Their focus had narrowed to the kill alone. Ghislain's eyes glinted with the purplish hue of his mana. Victor's eyes shone blue in stark contrast. With a surge, Victor gained leverage and forced Ghislain's blade downward, locking it under pressure. Using the narrow opportunity, Victor slid his sword up the trapped weapon, angling it toward Ghislain's neck. But Ghislain made no effort to resist the locking pressure. Instead, he bent his body beneath the sword's path, letting the blade pass harmlessly above him. That evasion left Victor exposed in return. Ghislain acted instantly. He grabbed Victor's collar and used the momentum of a leg sweep to throw him to the ground. Without pause, Ghislain leapt high into the air, sword held overhead, ready to strike. Victor's speed and strength may have been superior, but Ghislain's mastery of technique, honed through countless mortal duels, gave him an edge in execution. Victor rolled to the side just in time, narrowly escaping the descending blade. Any thought of uncovering Ghislain's origins had long vanished from his mind. Now, there was only the will to kill. Landing solidly on one foot, Victor dragged his blade across the earth in an upward arc. The motion kicked a wave of dirt toward Ghislain's face, a desperate bid to disrupt his vision. Though the maneuver was unorthodox, it was not enough to deceive someone like Ghislain. In that instant, Victor's mana surged violently into his blade as he drove it forward in a straight, unrelenting thrust aimed at Ghislain's head, but the attack, though powerful, was far too direct. Seasoned by battles without number, Ghislain saw through it with ease. A move like that would not be enough. In that fleeting instant, Ghislain conceded that Victor possessed extraordinary strength. There is little distinction between them now, a parity magnified by the full release of Ghislain's third mana core. An old memory surged forward, back to the beginning of the war, when Ghislain had launched an assault on Desmond's County. Even then, Victor had stood in opposition, barring the path. The contrast was stark. Victor had already been celebrated across the region as the Northern finest sword, a title acknowledged by noble and soldier alike. In contrast, Ghislain had been stripped of nobility, forced to earn renown by uniting mercenaries under a single cause. Despite the length and ferocity of that battle, Ghislain had eventually prevailed. He had slain the Northern finest sword. But that victory came only after wrestling with the weight of his personal vendetta to the bitter end. Yet that fight had proven to be only a small chapter. The forces of Desmond's County had seemed inexhaustible, just one fraction of the overwhelming foes threatening the North. By the time he had lost everything, his father, his sister, and the ruins of his estate, Ghislain had made a vow. From a moment he had knelt before the remnants of what Perdium had become, he had resolved to destroy anyone who threatened it. Men like Victor, even the mysterious regression, a fate bestowed by powers beyond comprehension, had not dulled the flame of rage. That fire, lit by devastation, continued to blaze within him. Though the strength he wielded now was only a portion of what he once possessed, his resolve had not diminished. Ghislain had sworn that those who aimed to crush Perdium would receive only death in return. Victor drew on his final reserves of power. With a roar that echoed like thunder, he drove his sword forward with unrelenting force. The toll of maintaining all three mana cores began to manifest, but Ghislain made no effort to evade. He steadied himself, preparing to strike. They advanced toward one another in an arc of mutual destruction, their blades slicing the air with singular intent, each aimed at the other's heart. A burst of mana ruptured the space between them. When they collided, Only one crimson spray marked the result. Blood burst from Victor's back as Gislin's sword pierced through his abdomen with ruthless precision. Though Gislin's muscles tore and his bones groaned beneath the pressure of swirling mana, he twisted just enough to avoid the path of Victor's blade. Victor's eyes widened in disbelief. This was not a misstep. Desmond County's forces, herald strategies, even their spies, none had accounted for this unforeseen variable. A force equal to the North's most legendary knight, Gislin Perdium. With a faltering breath, Victor whispered the name of his master, Count Desmond. The reason was unclear, but it mattered little. Gislin had already committed every enemy of Perdium to memory. A moment later, he retracted his blade and flung Victor's body across the scorched battlefield. The fallen knight lay motionless, unable to comprehend how the one before him had unraveled all their carefully laid plans. Amongst the blazing inferno and blistering heat, Gislin alone remained upright, while Victor collapsed into defeat. A quiet chuckle slipped from his lips as the finality of it settled in. The ambition that once fueled Victor now seemed laughable. He would perish, not as a legendary noble knight, but as a nameless commander among Dygald's ranks. Though his body howled in torment, the ecstasy of triumph overshadowed every wound. This was the threat posed by one granted the curse and gift of regression, the power to kill his enemies not once, but twice. But there was no satisfaction in dwelling on one death. Gislin's purpose remained. More adversaries awaited. With nothing more to say, he turned and walked away. At that moment, Victor's voice broke the stillness, calling out and prompting Gislin to turn his head slightly. The small gesture granted the fallen knight one final chance to speak. With breath slipping from his lungs, Victor asked who his opponent truly was. Even now, he could not reconcile the fact that he had been slain by Gislin. He mumbled faintly, recalling what he once believed, that Gislin was merely Perdium's disgrace, the northern scoundrel, the reclusive young master thought to have vanished into obscurity. Gislin offered nothing in return. No words, no affirmation. It was as if he silently allowed his defeated adversary to draw his own conclusions. A faint smile emerged on Victor's lips. With his final breath, he muttered that it no longer mattered. He admitted, almost whimsically, that the fight had been enjoyable. At last, he recognized the man who stood above him, Gislin Perdium. Beyond the battlefield, the sun rose slowly above the jagged mountain range, signaling the end of Desmond County's failed campaign to conquer Perdium. The flames that had once roared now faded, and on the scorched earth lay the lifeless body of Victor. Gislin turned, slipping his sword back into the sling across his back. There would be no rest for him. The path ahead held more battles, more monstrous figures like Victor, and his journey was far from over.